All right, so
Did we want the Tanyas?
no,
Because I thought you said you wanted to strike it, because they have a bunch of them in there. We can grab 3.
no, we're good. I'm done with the Tanakh, so I don't need them in.
Okay.
We're past the Tanakh time. Just needed it for 2
That's
weeks.
right, aren't we doing Jesus?
Yeah, we're doing Jesus today. We're doing the time of Jesus today, anyways. All right.
Jeebus.
So the topic for tonight is family living during the late Second Temple period. So sometime between the time of the Maccabees and the time that the temple was destroyed. So the last couple of centuries BCE, that's what we're looking at. So we're out of the Bible. The Bible has already been codified at that point. There's no more Bible. The only thing that's happening is that at this point in time, some of the rabbis are deciding which books will be included and which books will be not included. But a basic premise of the Tanakh is that they do not include anything that is attributed to after the time of Ezra. So if it says it was written after the time of Ezra, it can't be included in the Tanakh. That's why the book of Maccabees, for instance, is not included in the Tanakh. So we're going to look at, I think it'll be exciting because we don't usually get to see this stuff. We're going to look at a couple of Jewish written books from this time that were largely forgotten by Jews for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So we're going to take a look at some of the writings of Philo, and we're going to take a look at a little bit of the writings of Josephus, and we're going to take a look at a Roman historian who wrote about the Jews, not always in the best of terms, but he wrote about the Jews. And then we're going to look at a book that I'm not sure any of us have read prior. It's a book called Tobit. Anybody read Tobit? So also was written during this period of time. So most of these books were written sometime in the 2nd or the 1st century in BCE. So how do we have these books? Do anybody know?
Didn't the Christians codify them?
Yeah. So we have them because the Christian church kept them. The Christian church were like pack rats, and anything that they perceived that could have been written around the time of Jesus that could have elucidated life around the time of Jesus, they kept. And they kept it and they copied it, and a number of the books, if not most of the books that we're talking about, were written originally in Hebrew, but they translated them into Greek and they translated them into Latin, and they kept them for centuries. And it's only in the past maybe 100 years or so that Jews have really showed any interest in them, but they really shed a lot of light as to what Jewish life was like during this
Was
period of time.
Josephus only one guy? Because didn't he write like for 100 years?
He wrote for a long time, but he was only one guy. There we
He got around.
go. Okay.
Like a lot of times it's just people
Like,
had
it goes on and
had
off
the
on
same
and off.
names, and it could have been preaching too.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't know.
That remind me to tell you about Josephus and Jesus when we get to him, so we can do that. All right, so I just pulled this out of a book. It's really a nice book. It's the first part. It's called The Jewish Annotated New Testament. So it is a copy of the New Testament, but all the commentaries are by Jews. The editor of the book is called Amy Jill Levine, and basically she's commenting on it. What does the New Testament, or what does the Christian Bible tell us about Jewish life based upon what we know, and what is accurate, what's inaccurate in terms of the writings, in terms of how they describe Jewish life. So at the back of it there's an essay that talks about Jewish family life. So I pulled out some pieces from that. So basically it says that families during this time usually lived in multi-generational groupings. There was a husband and a wife and grown sons and minors. So it'd be like the grandfather and the grandmother, and then the grandfather and grandmother's kids, and then the kids' kids. Most husbands were monogamous for economic reasons. Daughters married between 12 and 20 years of age to men who were typically 10 to 15 years older than themselves. So a 12-year-old would be married to a 25, 27, a 30-year-old. So there's often a very wide age difference between the mothers and the fathers, between the husbands and the wives. Marriages were arranged and negotiated. Because of the high death rate of mothers during birth and the older age of fathers, adults often married more than once. So because the fathers were older than the wives, the husbands died. And because there was also a very high mortality rate during childbirth,
Was
husbands
polygamy
were often
legal?
widows. Polygamy was legal. Polygamy was not the general mode, but it was legal. The rabbis continued to talk about polygamy. And we knew that some people had more than one wife.
How was it the Torah was given that polygamy was no longer allowed?
Yeah, it's not the case. So polygamy continued for centuries. It wasn't until, I don't remember the exact date, but it was towards the end of the first millennium that Rabbi Gershom, for the Ashkenaz Jews, said that you could only be monogamous.
Well,
So-
it had to be after the Torah because we know Solomon had hundreds of
Yeah, I mean, but Torah meaning the Tanakh. So within
okay.
the Tanakh, they continued to have multiple wives. So around the year 1000 mark, give or take 100 years or so, the Jews were told, or the Ashkenazic Jews were told they could only have one wife, and that.
It's like the
But the
Sephardim,
Sephardim continued to have multiple wives for years, and I believe that with the establishment of the state of Israel, there were Sephardim who came in with more than one wife, and then the state had to figure out what to do with them.
Wow.
So, just for economic reasons, most people only had one wife, but technically it was okay to have more than one wife. So women would often be expected to get pregnant once every 2 or 3 years, and they would give birth to as many as 8 children. When 2 or 3 were dying, with 2 or 3 of these dying in infancy or childhood. So the average family would be about 5 kids at this point, and they would have multiple kids because the assumption was that the kids would work in the farm and would work on the household, and they needed many kids. And they also knew that children were going to die because there were childhood illnesses and there was difficulties during pregnancy, and so they would have multiple kids knowing the children would die. Sons were generally more desirable and desired than daughters. Grown sons remained in the family constellation while daughters joined the families with their new husbands.
When is this taking place?
So this is around the time of Jesus, more or less. So would you like more specifics on
No,
that?
that's what I was kind of wondering,
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
Okay. So little regard was paid to affection between the betrothed and the newlyweds, but harmony between husband and wife was often emphasized. So the marriages themselves were arranged. The idea of love wasn't necessarily an issue. It was what was the best match giving you the most money, but they expected husbands and wives to get along with each other. But what does that mean? Mostly in terms of the wife acquiescing to the desires of the husband. So if you get along, you do what your husband tells you, for the most case. And most activities during the day were gender segregated. So guys did guy things and women did women things, and so they didn't hang around so much during the daytime. So that's a little bit about the general family constellations at this time. So the first thing I want us to look at is a piece from Philo. So Philo means love, right? He lived in Alexandria in Egypt. He was a major Jewish philosopher of the time. He wrote about Judaism for the Egyptians, so the Egyptians would get to know about what Judaism was all about. The Jews settled in Alexandria shortly after Alexander the Great established the city. So there was an ever-increasing diaspora in Alexandria. So there were like 4 quarters in the city, and I think they said there were Jews living in 3 quarters of the 4 quarters. They tended to be well integrated into the community, and Alexandria, just by the name of it, was a very Hellenized city. So they really supported and promoted all the ideas of Greek culture. So the Judaism that was practiced in Alexandria was very much influenced by what was going on in the Greek world. So unlike Jerusalem with the Hanukkah story, where there was a solid group of people who really wanted to maintain the old ways, the Jews of Alexandria were more assimilated, and they adopted a lot of the Greek culture and Greek habits. Do you know what the Septuagint is?
What?
Septuagint.
Yeah.
So that
That's when they, isn't that when they had all of the Tanakhs and they put people in different rooms and they had to decide what it actually meant, and
Right.
it came up to be the same thing.
so there's a legend, and then there's the real story, and the real story may be true or not. I know that doesn't make any sense.
It's
but,
still a legend.
there's a legend that says that the king of Alexandria had heard about Judaism, and he wanted to know all about Judaism. So he wrote a letter to the high priest in Jerusalem and said, "I want to have a copy of your book, of your Bible." So what they arranged to do was they arranged to send down 70 scholars from Jerusalem and send them down to Egypt to make a Greek copy of the Bible. And so what did they do? Just like Fran said, they took these 70 scholars and they put them into 70 separate rooms, and they all worked on their translation of the Bible in these 70 separate rooms. And then when they came out of the room, what happened? Lo and behold, it was a miracle. All of them had the exact same.
Well, also supposedly there were no spaces between the words at that time,
Yeah.
so it was like all one giant word.
If you look at ancient texts, like if you go to look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, you see they didn't have spaces between the words. But a miracle happened, and it was an exact translation. Everything was the same. What probably happened was that the Jews of Alexandria had forgotten how to read Hebrew, that they couldn't read the Bible anymore in the original. So what did they need? They needed to have a copy of the Bible in Greek so they would know their own heritage. So the original copy of the Septuagint, which we still have today, Septuagint comes from the word 70, that we still have today, was probably for the Jews because they were similar. Not a whole lot different than here, right? So most Jews in North America, if they want to read the Bible, what do? They read it in English because they don't have the ability to speak it in Hebrew. So anyway, Philo, as you can see in the little paragraph here, he lived in the Egyptian city of Alexandria during the 1st century CE. So he was just he was just post Jesus. Alexandria, which had a large Jewish population, was one of the great Hellenistic centers of the Greek and Roman world. Jewish life in the metropolis was very different from that in Jerusalem. Jews maintained their ancestral faith, but with a Hellenistic flavor. So he wrote this book about Judaism, and he wrote about Jewish life. And his understanding of the Bible, Philo's understanding of the Bible was that it was largely allegorical. That when you read the miracles didn't really happen. The miracles were just standing in for something else, or to teach you a lesson, or to teach you a moral lesson. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at what Philo had to say about parenting. You'll notice that it's very different than what we looked at 2 weeks ago. So 2 weeks ago we were looking at aphorisms and sayings and little moral lessons and stuff like that, and single sentences. Philo, on the other hand, because he's under Greek influence, is going to be basing parenting on his philosophy of parenting, about his understanding of how parents ought to operate, how parents are in relation to God, how parents are in relation to their kids, always explaining the reasons for his decisions. So this is much closer to Dr. Spock than the book of Proverbs was last time. So he's going to talk to us about why he thinks parents should behave the way that they should. Marlene, you want to read the first one? You can see that it says 225 and 228. I skipped. I'm not giving you the entire thing.
Okay, so
Okay.
225.
Right.
For parents themselves are something between divine and human nature, partaking of both. Of human nature, inasmuch as it is plain that they have been born and they will die, and of divine nature, because they have
Engendered.
other beings, and have brought what they did not exist into existence. For in my opinion, what God is to the world, that parents are to their children, since just as as God gave existence to that which has had no existence, they also, in imitations of his power, at far at as least as we were able, make the race of mankind everlasting.
Okay, so what is Philo saying is the nature of a parent?
Don't ask me. It's like, I don't know.
Well, they're saying that parents are godlike.
Yeah, that's
because
right.
they give life.
Right. So just as God gives life from nothing, so too do parents give life from nothing. Just as God created the world, so too are we creating the world. But the difference between us and God is that we die, God doesn't die. So we have a bit of we have mortality in this, but we also have the divine. So we are, you know the expression, the legal expression in loco parentis.
Place
That
of parents.
pardon?
In place of
Yeah, in place of parents. So some people are responsible for kids in place of parents because the parents aren't able to do so. So parents, it appears from Philo's perspective, are in loco goddess. So they're taking God's place. So without having read any farther, what do you think he's going to say about the relationship between parents and children?
children gotta be good there for the parents.
Pardon?
Children should basically worship their parents.
Yeah, they should worship their parents, right? Well, you think that would be the parents, the children owe their parents existence, and so children should worship their parents
And never question.
and never
Yeah, right.
but we know
never-
the reality is.
and never
Right, in this
question.
world, I can take you out.
Okay. So, but let's say if he's right or not. Okay, you want to keep reading?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
28.
I have. Oh. Which,
No, go ahead.
I affirm, therefore, that which produces is always older than that which is produced. Okay, and that
Okay.
which causes anything is older than that of which it is the cause. But those who beget or bring forth a child are in some sense the causes and producers of the child which is begotten and brought forth. And they stand in light of teachers, inasmuch as all that they know themselves they teach to their children from their earliest infancy. And they not only exercise and train them in the supernumerary accomplishments, impressing reasonings on the minds of the children when they come to their prime, but they also teach them those most necessary lessons which refer to choice and avoidance. The choice, that is to say, of virtues and the avoidance of vices and of all the energies in accordance with them.
Okay. So not only have parents brought their kids into the world, but what also do parents do?
Made him listen to whatever they say.
They make them listen to what they say, or another way of looking at it,
Whatever.
they are the
Teachers.
teachers of the kids. So they teach the kids, they teach them what's right, they teach them what's wrong, they teach them everything they need to know. Parents are responsible for imparting all the necessary knowledge that kids have. So parents, according to him, are pretty darn important.
And they're older.
And they're, right. Okay,
Out your hands.
all right, so what does that mean?
Well,
What-
let's go this way, if the mother was 13, she's a baby herself, but she has given a baby.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, in today's world, a 12 or 13-year-old is a pitcher. Okay, just is in that age, in that era. Okay, their parents were out of the house. They are thrown into a society where they actually have to do everything on their own.
Mhm.
But in this society, actually, the grandparents are also in the house. I mean,
Yeah, so grandparents are there, but you're right. You still got a 12 or a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old girl who's the mother, and she's expected to be the mother. The notion of extended childhood, the notion of adolescence, the notion of giving time to grow up, that's relatively recent.
Yeah.
You were a 12 or 13 guy, and you were out to work, or a 13-year-old girl, and you were ready.
Even though our 12 and 13-year-old children who have children, they usually aren't
Right, they
on
aren't
the streets by
right.
themselves.
They're not particularly
Yeah.
sophisticated.
Right.
Okay, so now we know that parents are super people, right? So parents are super people because they're like God and they teach their children everything. And it sounds like the children are going to be obliged to obey their parents, but let's see what he
Not
says.
necessarily.
Okay, let's see what he
Just like
says.
every
Next
society.
Okay.
Okay. For these reasons, it is allowable for parents even to accuse their children and to reprove them with considerable severity. And if they do not submit to the threats which are uttered to them by the word of mouth, to beat them and inflict personal punishment on them and to imprison them. And if they behave with
Obstinacy.
and resist this treatment because of stiff-necked through the greatness of their incurable wickedness, the law permits them to chastise them even to the extent of putting them to death.
Well, I would have died.
But still this permission is not given to either the father by himself or to other by herself, by the reason of the greatness of the punishment, which is not fitting, which should be determined by one, but by both together. For it is probable that both the parents will agree about putting their child to death.
Okay.
Okay. It's the old adage that if they had a wicked, even in the Torah, it's sometimes you have a wicked son, you bring him to the elders.
Right,
And you say,
Right,
this
they
has
had to
been a
agree.
stiff neck, so forth and so on, and,
right.
so this really follows along
Right.
really about the same
Yeah.
way.
Even 500 years later, he's still saying the same thing that the Torah says.
Right,
He
you,
says,
still, you could stone them, but you have to both agree.
yeah. So
That won't
it-
happen.
he's relying on
Because
what
the husband was the dominant person and said, this is what's gonna happen, and she had no rights.
He's relying on what the Torah says, and the Torah says clearly that both the mother and the father have to accuse the child of doing this. So that's the out. By the way, I don't know if I told you this a couple of weeks ago or not, but the rabbis said, we'll get to the rabbis next time, but the rabbis said that the story of the son who got stoned never happened. That there was never ever a son who was stoned. So the question becomes, why is that story there? And the answer is, pardon?
It's to scare the kids.
Yeah, to scare the kids, right? It's the boogeyman story. To scare the kids or to study about what would happen if a child is really, really bad. But they claim that no child was ever stoned. But it's amazing here. I don't remember if he was married and had kids or not, but certainly he's advocating for a very, very strong role of the parents here, and the children are totally beholden.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, was this guy actually a parent?
Yeah, I don't remember, but
Philo-
totally beholden.
Philo was actually Jewish.
Yeah. Yeah, so Philo was a Jew, Jewish philosopher living during this time, and Philo's nephew became a Roman general who was part of the attack on Jerusalem when the temple was destroyed, or shortly before the temple was destroyed. So it was a very assimilated family. All right, Fran, why don't you do the next one?
But parents have received not only the power of a ruler and governor over their children, but also that of a master, possessing them as born in the house and also as purchased with money, for they expend a price many times greater than their real value on the children, and for the sake of their children in wages to nurses and instructors and teachers. That hasn't changed. Besides all the expenses which they incur for their dress and their food and the other care of them, as well when well and when sick, and from their earliest infancy until the time that they are full grown.
Okay.
That's so weird. That's the same thing as now.
Okay, so what's he saying?
Kids cost a lot of money.
That's right. Kids cost a lot of money. So even 2,000 years ago,
They were
they're
complaining
saying,
about saving for their college fund.
still saying, if we had to add it all up, and we had to see how much it costs, you have no idea how much it costs to get tutors for the kids and teachers for the kids and clothes and food for the kids. And so we have to spend all this money on the kids. And so what does that mean in terms of the kids? We haven't heard yet, but
Well,
They should be holding to their parents.
right.
yeah.
So now is the kicker. Since then is the case, those who do honor their parents and not do anything worthy of praise, since even any single one of the commandments already mentioned is sufficient to invite them to regard their parents with reverence. So they are obligated to revere their parents because their parents are God, because their parents are teachers, and because their parents put out money
Out of the
for them
bank.
all these years. and there's no reason whatsoever for them not to honor their parents. So for me,
So it's interesting that if you do honor your parents, he's saying that isn't praiseworthy.
right,
So
right, right.
It's just what you have to do,
That's
not
right.
what you should do.
Yeah. So you don't look at a kid and say, wow, he treats his parents really nicely, and he's really respectful of his parents, and he follows what his parents say, because
It's expected.
it's expected.
Basically,
right.
you say, that kid is not worthy of anything. He doesn't care about his parents. But it's never the other way around. It's-
Okay. So it's an expected behavior that you are supposed to watch over your parents.
So we need to circle this and start.
But you're right. I mean, a certain portion of this sounds very similar to today. Still complaining about all the money that you have to put out for your kids. I know that I haven't seen anyone recently, but I know that periodically they come out with statements about, if a child was born today, it would cost you this much
$10
money
million,
to raise a child over the next 18 years.
And it's not 18 years anymore. Now it's more like
30.
26, 30, yeah.
Yeah.
And then if
Get out of the
you,
house and work it on our own.
Or get out and stay out.
or if you send your kid to, in Jewish kids, if you send your kid to day school, or if you send your
A lot
kid
of
to
money.
Jewish summer camp, all
Right,
those things
right.
begin to add on. So he was a pretty strict guy. So let's see what he has to say about married life. I couldn't find a whole lot on married life, but here's a little bit here. Okay, Marlene, you want to read?
Every woman who is companion for life of a husband suffers all those things. Not indeed.
Not, yeah, right, not indeed.
Okay. As a curse, but as necessary evils. But speaking figuratively, the human sense is wholly subjected to severe labor and pain, being stricken and wounded by domestic agitation.
All right, so according to him, he should be on the couch probably, but according to him, married life is hard, right? So you're don't talk to me about happily ever after. Don't talk to me about people living together nicely. According to him, married life is
Well, especially for the woman.
is difficult, right?
Because she has to do whatever he says.
That's right. Okay, every woman who is the companion for life of a husband suffers all those things, not indeed as a curse, but as necessary evils. So if you're married to a man, you're going to suffer. Not because you're being punished, because that's just the way life is. But speaking figuratively, the human sense is wholly subjected to severe labor and pain. So life in general is a life of pain, being stricken and wounded by domestic agitations. And the life is particularly problematic by the domestic problems that we have. So here's a guy, he must have had a really fun household, right? So his household was terrific. He was God in the household. His kids had to listen to him exactly. They weren't allowed to any latitude. And if his wife whined, what would he say?
Yeah,
Tough.
too bad.
All right. So Josephus was primarily a historian. Josephus is an interesting character. Josephus lived to see the destruction of the Second Temple. He was a Kohen, and he was also, anybody, you all know this stuff?
Oh, go on.
Okay, so he was a Kohen, he lived in the Galilee, and he was part of the rebellion against the Romans. So when the Romans came to counter the rebellion, they came in from the north, and Josephus was the first line of resistance against the Romans. The Romans defeated his northern army, and Josephus fled with some of his officers and hid. According to Josephus's own writings, he said that he came up with a pact with his officers that they would kill him, that they would kill themselves. So they would pick straws, and anybody with a short straw would get killed. And then, so they ended up killing each other until there was only one person left. Guess who?
Him when he wrote
Yeah,
his
Josephus. So Josephus, probably controlled the straws from the beginning. I don't trust him. And instead of killing himself, what did he do? He gave himself into the Romans. And so he moved in with the Roman camp, and he spent the rest of the war serving as a historian to the generals, writing about the destruction of the temple. After the war in 73, and he's the one who wrote about Masada. So we know about Masada because of what Josephus wrote. Jews hated him. Jews saw him as a traitor and as rebellious and a turncoat, and Jews wanted to have nothing to do with him. But when we go today and we look at the temple, for instance, the ruins of the temple in Jerusalem, and they say, oh, this looks like just the description of the temple. We know about the description of the temple because of Josephus. After the war, he moved to Rome, and he was a patron of the emperor, and he wrote histories. So he wrote the wars against the Jews, which was about the war of destruction of the temple. He wrote a book called the Antiquities of the Jews, which was a book about the history of the Jews. He wrote something called Against Appian. Appian didn't like the Jews, so he wrote a book about promoting Judaism against Appian. He wrote hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages, again, saved by the church. Part of the reason why the church saved it is because in the middle of all of his books, there's a little section about yay big that says that living in Jerusalem at the time was a man whose name was Joseph, son of Jesus, son of Joseph, who was the true Messiah, and he was killed by the Jews. That's the total extent of what it says.
He's a troublemaker.
Okay, so the total extent of what it
killed
says.
by the Jews.
And so the Christians have used the text for hundreds of years as a way of saying, see, even the Jew wrote that he's the Messiah.
And the Jews killed him.
Right. Probably what happened was that somewhere along the line, a Christian came along and added that section into Josephus's book. So Josephus very well may have written about Jesus having been killed, but calling him the Messiah, Josephus never would have done that, because Josephus was a Jew, and he would only be Messiah if he brought along world peace. So anyway, let's hear what Josephus has to say. Josephus says, before we read it, so he's talking about genetics. He's got this really interesting thing. So if you have bad parents, you're going to have bad kids, and if you have good parents, you're going to have
Not necessarily.
good kids. So you would think, right, that if you have a good mom and dad, then you're going to have a good kid, and if you have a bad mom and dad, you're going to have a bad kid. We know that doesn't necessarily happen, and I'm overgeneralizing with saying good kids and bad kids. I should probably say if you have good parents, you're going to have kids who do good things, and if you have bad parents, you have kids who do bad things. But anyway, this is what he says here. Now these men afford us he's talking about some of the people he was writing about, some of the characters in his books. Now these men afford us an evident example and demonstration how some children are not of the like dispositions of their parents, but sometimes perhaps good and moderate, though born of wicked parents, and sometimes, though good and moderate, though born of wicked parents, and sometimes showing themselves to be wicked, though born of good parents. So even 2,000 years ago, he knew that good parents could have bad kids and bad parents could have good kids, and it wasn't always the parents' fault. So, yeah, so good parenting. Sometimes it's just the luck of the draw. Okay, turn the page. This is another Jewish guy who lived prior to the destruction of the temple. His name was Ben Sira, and he wrote a book similar to Mishlei. He wrote a book that was full of aphorisms, a little bit like Ben Franklin, writing books of short phrases about how to behave. Some of the books that we're looking at tonight. So there was Philo, right, who wrote his own stuff. And then there was Josephus, who wrote his own stuff. But then there's a series of books that are called the Apocrypha. Which mean the hidden books. Apocrypha means hidden books. So these are books written by Jews that the Jews did not include in their Bible. So an example are the books of Maccabees. They're not included in the Bible. Ben Sirach is not included in the Bible. Tobit, that we're going to look at in a little bit, is not in the Bible. But these books were included, I believe it was in the Catholic Bible, and they were known as the Apocrypha. And so if you look at a Catholic Bible, you'll see a bunch of books that the names just don't sound right, but they're all books that are written by Jews and kept because of their relationship to the time of Jesus. So Ben Sirach is one of those books. So within his books, he has suggestions for parenting. So as we read through this, see how Ben Sirach, who lived in Jerusalem, was the same or different from Philo, who lived in Alexandria. All right. You can see that says, the author of Jerusalem probably lived at the beginning of the Hashmonean period. His work, originally composed in Hebrew, was later translated into Greek by his grandson. This book is sometimes mentioned in the Talmud. They talk about the wisdom of Ben Sirach. The rabbis are very clear that they didn't want to include it in their Bible because it was late composition. They didn't always agree with everything that he said, which was part of it too. All right, so, okay, let's just go around. Read a line at a time. You want to start?
The man who disciplines his son will profit by him, and boast of him among his acquaintance.
Okay, so what are you supposed to do?
Talk about your son, the doctor.
Well, besides talking about your son, the doctor, what else do you need to do? You need
love.
tough love, right?
Yeah.
Tough love. Okay, Melissa.
The man who teaches his son will make his enemy jealous and exult over him before his friends.
Okay, so similar to what we were saying, he'll talk about his son. He'll talk to his friends about his son, the doctor, but he needs to teach his son. He needs to be a good teacher. So he has to discipline him and he has to teach him. Okay, Sid.
When his father dies, it is as though he were not dead, or he leaves behind him like himself.
Okay, so what's a good thing about having a son?
He'll be just like his father.
Just like his father. So it's immortality. So you become immortal because when you die, you've got a son who looks just like you and behaves just like you and thinks just like you. And what will people say? And what will people say? They'll say, "Oh, he is the son of so and so."
What about the daughters?
We don't care about the daughters.
Nice.
Okay.
In his lifetime he sees him and rejoices, and in death he does not grieve.
Okay. So this is a great son, and everything is great. He has left one to avenge upon his enemies and to repay the kindness of his friends.
So, if somebody kills the father, you're supposed to avenge and kill.
That's right. Right. So actually, in the Torah, I'm teaching another class on power politics, and in the Torah it talks about just before King David dies, and King David sits down and has a conversation with Solomon before he dies. Just prior to that, David is described as old and weak, and he can't keep himself warm, and he's really kind of impotent. But he suddenly has a sudden surge of energy, and he sits down with Solomon. He says, "Solomon, if you want to be a really good king, this is what you have to do." And he gives him a hit list. It's like a mafia don talking to his
Wow.
talking to his disciple. He says, "Well, I had this general. The general is really good, but he's a loose cannon. Go kill the general. This other guy, he's a nice guy, but he insulted me. Kill him as well. The priests are okay guys. The Kohanim are okay guys, but they're not really trustworthy. So replace them with other priests." It just goes through this whole thing. And then the next chapter talks about how Solomon was a good son and avenged his father and did what he was supposed to do.
Yeah, David was good at taking revenge on people.
Yeah, he was good at doing what
Not
needed
my
to.
David.
Well,
Doing
not
the
my
David,
David,
don't
no,
you?
but the King David.
Okay, whose turn is it?
Mine.
Okay.
The man who spoils his son will have to bind up his wounds, and his heart will tremble at every cry.
Okay, so this is the opposite, right? So the first half is you got to discipline your son, but if you spoil your son and you give in to him too much, what's going to happen? You're going
That's what
to
happens.
be miserable. Pardon?
Sounds like he'll be
I
weak.
said that's what happens,
That's right.
unfortunately, or whatever.
Okay, Lisa.
An unbroken horse turns out stubborn, and a son left to himself grows up headstrong.
Okay, so what do you need to do? You need to bridle your
Break
son.
him.
Yeah, break him. You're going to need to bridle your son. Okay, Sid.
If you pamper your child, he will astonish you. Play with him, and he will grieve you.
Grieve you. Yeah. Astonished, by the way, doesn't mean, wow, look at my son. Astonished means he will surprise you
In a bad way.
In a bad way.
Okay, yeah, because it sounded like, oh, that sounds good.
Right,
That's
that's actually the time.
If you pamper your child, he will. So he's not a whole lot different than Philo here. I mean, he's basically saying, teach your son, make sure your child knows, and don't smile, right? Take care of your kid and make sure that the child minds his P's and Q's. Okay.
Do not laugh with him, so that you may not have to mourn with him, and gnash your teeth over him at last.
All right. So don't.
Don't be a buddy.
Yeah, don't be his buddy. Don't be your child's buddy. It's like what they tell teachers when they work with kids for the first time. They say a basic rule is don't smile until Christmas.
Really?
Yeah. Why? Because what they want you to do is they want you to set the rules.
Right, and earn the
Yeah,
respect.
set the rules, earn the respect, let them know that you mean business. And then once they have learned the rules, then you can start to let go of them.
Don't let them see your fear.
And then do not allow him liberty in his youth. I'll going back to what you said before about tough love. So we have to take care of it. Take care of your kids, but make sure that they don't screw around. All right. The next one is, I think you'll find interesting. This is a Roman historian. He was a pagan, and he wrote histories of the Roman Republic during the 1st century. So he wrote a Roman history of the wars against the Jews. He wrote, and on top of everything else, he also wrote about other races. So he would talk about the Jews, and he would talk about the Syrians, and he'd talk about the Babylonians, and he'd talk about the Persians. So what I want you to do what I want us to do is to read through this whole thing. I'm not going to tell you anything else about it at this point, but I just want you to read through the whole thing. And then after we've read through it, then I want you to give me your reactions and ask me any questions you have about it. Okay, somebody want to read?
They're better than me.
Okay.
Who wants to read?
This worship, however introduced, is upheld by its antiquity. All their other customs, which are at once perverse and disgusting, owe their strength to their very badness.
Okay, who are we talking about now?
I have no idea.
Oh, we're talking about the Jews.
Oh.
Okay, so their worship, the Jewish worship, however introduced, is upheld by its antiquity. All their other customs, so it's old, right?
Right.
It's old, but everything they do is perverse and disgusting and owe their strength to their very badness. Okay, keep going.
The most degraded out of other races, scorning their national beliefs, brought to them their contributions and presents. This augmented the wealth of the Jews, as also did the fact that among themselves they are inflexibly honest and ever ready to show compassion, though they regarded the rest of mankind with all the hatred of enemies. They sit apart at meals, they sleep apart, and though as a nation they are singularly prone to lust, they abstain from intercourse with foreign women. Among themselves nothing is unlawful. Circumcision was adopted by them as a marked difference from other men. Those who come over to the religion adopt the practice and have this lesson first instilled into them to despise all gods, to disown their country, and set at naught parents, children, and brethren. Still, they provide for the increase of their numbers. It is a crime among them to kill any newly born infant. They hold that the souls of all who perish in battle or by the hands of the executioner are immortal. Hence a passion for propagating their race and a contempt for death. They are wont to bury rather than to burn their dead, following this the Egyptian custom. They bestow the same care on the dead, and they hold the same belief about the lower world. Quite different is their faith about things divine. Institutions do not by any means harmonize with the theory. For Liber established a festive and cheerful worship, while the Jewish religion is tasteless and mean.
He didn't like us.
No, he's saying the things that we do. That you know what I'm saying. That
And something that's right.
Right,
Yeah.
right, we do keep it apart, but that's because we don't want to assimilate.
right.
And, yeah, and that we won't sleep with foreign women.
We didn't say that.
Sort of.
Okay, so let's play it out this way. So what is he saying about Roman society that's different from Jewish society?
They're promiscuous.
Right, so
Right.
they were more promiscuous. They would sleep with just about anybody, right?
Not the Jews. Everybody else.
The Jews would sleep with the Jews, but they wouldn't sleep with anybody else. But the
Right.
Romans slept with
Right.
everybody.
Okay, what else do we learn about the Romans?
Apparently it's okay to kill your newly born infants.
That's right.
Right.
Right, okay, so if you have a baby and the baby is disabled or the baby is unwanted, then what do?
Just kill it.
You just kill the baby. So it's okay to do that. So baby is not a real life, and it's okay to do that. What else do they do?
Burn their dead.
They burn their dead.
They don't care.
Which is theoretically the Christian way today, that they'll still, do the cremation.
Yeah, so, right,
Which we,
Yeah.
some people still do it in the Jewish religion, but that theoretically you're not supposed to.
right,
And they didn't circumcise,
right. No circumcision.
and we did it. And he says we did it only to, be separate. Which, yeah.
So those
not
are
the reason, right?
those are things the Romans do. What are the bad things that the Jews do, according to him?
Serve our meals, sleep apart.
Okay, they're not social, right?
Not so-
They're clannish and they stick to themselves and don't eat with other people and don't. What else?
Well, probably because nobody would eat with them if they wanted them to. You know what I'm saying? In the Romans, he would say this is what the Jews do.
Right.
They wouldn't
In
even-
between the Jewish people, they were honest, and with everybody else, they could care less.
Right. So in their own society, they're scrupulously honest and they're really take care of each other, but they don't care about people on the outside. And if somebody comes in and wants to convert, what happens to them? They
Accept them.
accept them and they
Right.
become just like them.
Right.
So they teach them all the same stuff. What other perverse things do we do? We're prone to
Lust.
we're prone to lust. So Jews are lustful individuals.
But only among each other.
No,
Right.
lustful for the religion.
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's lust for the religion. I think it's
Right.
we're sexually perverse.
Right, and and it says before that we propagated a lot, which okay.
All right. So is Tacitus anti-Semite?
Probably, he does not like the Jews, but he may not. It may not just be the Jews he doesn't like.
All right. So let me give you a little bit more flesh to this. So first of all, you can see that he lived. He was born around 56 CE and he died after 117 CE. So first of all, we can see that he lived during the time of the Great Revolt. So he lived when the Jews rebelled against Rome. And the war was like a good 3 years. No, it was more than that. It was total. The war was about 6 or 7 years. It was very, very difficult. So he's not going to say nice things about the Jews who were responsible for killing lots of Romans or taking up lots of Roman time and money. That's number one. Number two, he was a pagan. I don't mean that negatively, but he was a polytheist. He had many gods, and so having many gods. So I'll say something which I think is a little bit controversial. So pagans were generally more tolerant of others than monotheists were. Okay, so let me say that one more time. Don't write it down.
I don't understand.
You can write it down if you want to.
No,
but
that's okay.
If you were a pagan, you tend and somebody had a god different than yours, what would you do? You would simply say, okay, you can pray to your God and you can also pray to my God. So pagans didn't usually say, well, our gods are the only gods. They would say that our gods are our gods, and every god had their own territory, and kind of live and be well. So if two nations would start to fight with each other, so on the heavenly level, what would happen? The Greek gods would fight against the Roman gods, the Roman gods would fight against the Greek gods, and whichever gods were stronger, their people would win. But they never said anything about other gods not existing. So most Greek and Roman cities allowed for the worship of multiple deities.
Right.
The Jews, on the other hand, and later the Christians, what did they say?
That we have our God, and that is the God.
Right, and there are no other gods.
Right.
If you look through the Torah says over and over again that if you're living in Israel and you have all these other gods, what do you have to do with them? You have to destroy them. So Jews weren't tolerant. So here it is, Tacitus is looking at this Jewish religion, where generally speaking in the civilized world at the time, everybody would accept everybody's gods. And what are the Jews doing? The Jews are not not accepting anybody's religion. So he was really having a tough time understanding it, which is part of the reason why he was saying the Jews are clannish and cliquish and keep to themselves, because nobody else did. And so they were having a real difficulty.
And the Jews that didn't assimilate were clannish and cliquish because they didn't want to become those who assimilated, who really weren't Jews anymore.
And then the other thing I want to point out is that during this time, late Second Temple period, Judaism was very popular. Lots of people were converting to Judaism. It was trendy to become Jewish.
Wow.
So historians say that around this time, about 10% of the Roman Empire was Jewish. So 1 out of every 10 people were Jewish.
Well, what about the going back to Jerusalem then with the temple during that time? It was already destroyed.
Right. So, but even after that, Judaism continued to be a popular faith. Now, lots of Jews got killed, mind you, but it was still a popular faith. And so Tacitus, being a good Roman and wanting to maintain the status quo, one of the things that he had to do was he had to put down Judaism. So he had to put down this faith that so many other people were converting to. By the way, most of the people who converted to Judaism at this time were women. Why women, not men? Because the men had to go through circumcision.
Oh.
Okay. So
Yeah.
So it was much easier.
And going through circumcision when you're an adult, you could die.
Right. Or be in pain for a long time.
Or you think you were dying.
Well, you figure if you go back to after the third day, if you go back to Judah's sons,
Yeah.
okay,
Right.
when they attacked the city, the men were in pain. The third day.
You become very vulnerable.
Why was it popular at this time to convert?
It was
To be Jewish?
It was popular because people liked the religion. They liked the philosophy behind it. They liked the practices behind it. They liked the fact that they didn't have to work 1 day a week. It was, like I said, it was trendy. Christianity and Judaism, for the first couple of centuries CE, competed for converts. Judaism wasn't really put down until Constantine in the 300s. The part of the reason why the early Christians put down the Jews in their writings was because they were competitors. And so they wrote nasty things about the Jews because they were competing for the same market. Not a whole lot different than what goes on in politics today, right? All right, turn the page. So this is the biggest reading that I have for today. This is the book of Tobit. The first paragraph I have there is a little bit of the history of the book of Tobit. They originally thought that the book of Tobit was post-destruction of the Second Temple. But then when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they discovered fragments of the book of Tobit in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which means that it was composed prior to the destruction of the temple. It was probably written originally in Hebrew. Today we have 3 versions of it that's only in the Greek, so we don't have the original Hebrew. It's a neat story. It's a little bit of a morality play, and it's a little bit of the supernatural, and it's got angels and poison snakes and gallbladders and hearts and livers and all kinds of stuff in it. But I put it here because it's got some interesting things about parenting. It's got some interesting things about relationships between husbands and wives, and some interesting things about relationships between parents and kids. So I'll read to you the summary so you know what the story is all about. And then the whole thing is like 12 chapters. I selected some little bits and pieces of this, because we're not going to read through the whole thing. Okay, you see where it says summary on page 4? All right. So the book of the story of Tobit, living in Nineveh after Sargon II deported the northern tribes of Israel to Assyria in 721 BC. So the story supposedly takes place after the northern tribes of Israel were destroyed by the Assyrians in 721 BC, or 700 years earlier. That's the setting of the story. Okay. He remains loyal to the worship of God at the temple in Jerusalem. He particularly noted for his diligence in attempting to provide proper burials for fallen Israelites whom Sancherib has slain, for which the king seizes his property and exiles him. So what happens is that he keeps kosher, he maintains 2 sets of dishes, he does what he has to do, and he also, if he runs across corpses of people who were killed by the Assyrians, he wants to make sure they're buried. And you know that in Judaism, you're supposed to bury somebody right away. So when the Assyrian kings find out, if the king finds out about it, he exiles him. But after Sennacherib's death, Tobit is allowed to return to Nineveh and buries a man who's been murdered on the street. So he comes back and he does the same thing again. He finds a man who was killed, and he doesn't want to let him stay in the street, so he buries him. That night he sleeps in the open and is blinded by bird droppings that fall in his eyes. That strains his marriage, and ultimately he prays for death. So he stays outside because he's worried about what's going to happen to him, that they're going to come after him, and the bird poos on him, and then he goes blind and he prays for death. Meanwhile, in faraway Media or Persia, there's a young woman named Sarah who's also prayed for death and despair. The demon of lust, Asmodeus, the worst of demons, abducts and kills every man she marries on their wedding night before the marriage can be consummated. So Sarah has been engaged 7 times. And on the wedding night, on each of the 7 times, her husband dies because of Asmodeus the demon. God then sends the angel Raphael, disguised as a human, to heal Tobit and to free Sarah from the demon. Okay, so we're okay? Understand what's going on so far? Mm-hmm. So Tobit is blind, he wants to die, Sarah wants to die too because she can't seem to keep a man. And so then the main narrative is then dedicated to Tobit's son, Tobiah, or Tobiah, who his father sends to collect money that the elder has deposited in the distant Media. So this is a very complicated story. So Tobit wants to die. Tobit wants to die, but he wants to make sure that his son is well cared for. So he tells his son that he has 10 silver coins that he hid far away. And then he tells his son that if you want to be okay, go find these silver coins that I hid many, many years ago. Raphael, the angel, presents himself as Tobit's kinsman, Azariah, and offers to aid and protect Tobiah. Under Raphael's guidance, Tobiah journeys to Media with his dog over the objection of Tobit's wife, Hannah. So what happens? Tobiah sets off on a journey, and he heads out to find the coins, and who does he go out with?
His dog.
And his mother doesn't like it.
Right, his mother doesn't like it. Doesn't want his son to leave town. And a dog, but who else does he go with? Not just the dog, but Raphael. So Raphael is following along too. Along the way, while he washes his feet in the Tigris, a fish tries to swallow his foot. By the angel's order, he captures it and removes its heart, liver, and gallbladder. So the angel, who he doesn't know is an angel, says, take this fish and save these 3 parts of it. I'll tell you why later. But it's good for you to say. So he's walking around with smelly fish parts. And he's heading out. Upon arriving in Media, Raphael tells Tobias about the beautiful Sarah, whom Tobias has the right to marry, because he is her cousin and closest relative. The angel instructs the young man to burn the fish's liver and heart and drive away the demon when he attacks on the wedding night. So he's given him away so that he won't die on the wedding night. The 2 marry, and the fumes of the burning organs drive the demon to Upper Egypt, where Raphael follows and binds him. Sarah's father has been digging a grave to secretly bury Tobias, whom he assumed would die.
Nice.
So,
It was a wedding gift.
So
We found tradition to bury this
Right.
That's right. So he's figuring, I've lost 7 already, so I might as well bury the other one.
This would be a really good television program, huh?
Surprised to find his son-in-law alive and well, he orders a double-length wedding feast and has the grave secretly filled. Since the feast prevents him from leaving, Tobias sends Raphael to recover his father's money. After the feast, Tobias and Sarah return to Nineveh. So they've got married. They get married in Persia, and now they have to go meet Tobit, who's sitting there blind and wondering what happened to his son. There, Raphael tells the youth to use the fish's gallbladder to cure his father's blindness.
He's still got the stinky fish parts.
That's right, still carrying it with him.
What a
Kept it
guy.
on ice.
Yeah.
Raphael then reveals his identity and returns to heaven, and Tobit sings a hymn of praise. Tobit tells his son to leave Nineveh before God destroys it, according to prophecy. How do we know? Well, so Nineveh is later destroyed by the Babylonians. This is the same Nineveh, by the way, that Jonah went to. So Jonah was supposed to go to Nineveh. After the prayer, Tobit dies in advanced age. After burying his father and mother, Tobias returns to Media with his family. So that's the summary of the story. Strange story, but interesting. A little bit more far-fetched than the some of the Bible stories. But if you look in the introduction I put, it says that some people would like the book of Tobit to be put into the Tanakh at this point. So it could be put into the Tanakh because it takes place before the time of Ezra. But it would have to be accepted as actually having been written prior to the time of Ezra, which most people are not willing to do. Okay,
But
so
now you said the Dead Sea Scrolls prove that it was.
the Dead Sea Scrolls prove that it existed prior to the destruction of the second temple, but not that it existed prior to Ezra. All right, so I broke it down into a couple of parts. Marlene, you want to read?
Part 1.
Yeah, part 1.
The book of the words of Tobit, son of Tobiah, the son of, I can't do this, the son of Ariel, the son of Aduel, the son of Gabriel, of the seed of Ashriel, of the tribe of Nephtali. I don't know. Do I have to do this?
Okay, you don't have to. Okay.
Wrote it all this
Oh, you see, you want to read?
Furthermore, when I was come to the age of a man, I married Anna of my own kindred, and of her I begat Tobias. And when we were carried away captives to Nineveh, all my brethren and those that were of my kindred did eat of the bread of the Gentiles, but I kept myself from eating.
Oh, so what did he do?
He kept kosher.
Right. So he kept kosher. Everybody else ate the other stuff, but so it's interesting. This book is some 2,000 years old, and even 2,000 years ago they were talking about what do you have to do to be Jewish? You have to continue to keep kosher.
But it's interesting that they said the bread of the Gentiles, which is the one thing that may not have been so unkosher.
Mm-hmm.
It was
But bread in this case is probably like just the
Right.
general food.
right,
Food.
neat.
The general food.
Right, right.
I don't remember, years ago, it must have been in the 70s, there was a parody song about a Jewish cowboy. And I'm trying to remember what his name was, but it was, but the one line in the song that I remember was, even on the range, he kept 2 sets of dishes. So Tobit here made sure to keep kosher. Okay, keep going.
Because I remember God with all my heart. And in the time of Anamesar, I gave many alms to my brethren, and gave my bread to the hungry, and my clothes to the naked. And if I saw any of my nation dead or cast about the walls of Nineveh, I buried him. And if the king Sennacherib had slain any when he was come and fled from Judea, I buried them privily. For in his wrath he killed many, but the bodies were not found when they were sought for of the king.
Okay, so he would, if he saw any bodies, he would kill them, and if Sennacherib killed anybody, I'm sorry,
He would
if
bury them.
he would bury them, he would make sure that he buried them.
That's what you were saying before, previously in the end. Right.
Right. Good lights here. Okay.
Oh, so,
I'm gonna have to
so
talk
the
to the-
reason the guy didn't like that he was killing, or he was burying all these people, is because then he couldn't count the kills that he had.
Right, you couldn't find the bodies afterwards.
Right.
You wanted to find the bodies. Okay.
And when one of the Ninevites went and complained to me of the king that I buried them and hid myself, understanding that I was sought for to be put to death, I withdrew myself for fear.
So he ran away.
Then all my goods were forcibly taken away. Neither was there anything left beside me, beside my wife Anna and my son Tobias.
So much like Job, he was a wealthy man, but then he lost everything, and all he had was left his wife Anna and his son Tobias. Sid, do you feel like reading?
Now, when I came home again, and my wife
I mean, he ran away, Sancheriv died, and now he came back.
and my wife Anna was restored to me, and my son Tobias in the feast of Pentecost, which is the holy feast of the 7 week. There was a good dinner prepared. It was a good dinner prepared me in the way I sat down to eat.
Okay, so if you're a good wife, what do you do?
Make good dinner for
You
yourself.
make a good dinner.
My-
So he
my
came back,
son-
it happened to be Shavuos,
Right.
so he made us a cheesecake and,
Right, since that's the one holiday we don't know what to eat. It's like,
Well, it doesn't say meat.
no, it doesn't say
no.
meat.
It just says a good meal.
Yeah, good meal.
right.
So I had a good meal, that's what she did, okay.
Okay, so it could be abundances. Yeah.
Oh, wait, next verse, look at the next verse.
And when
No.
I saw abundance of meat, I said to my son, "Go and bring what poor man, whatsoever you shall find out of your brother, who is mindful of the Lord, and lo, I tarry for thee."
Okay, so what's he saying is that he had all this meat.
All who are hungry, let them
That's
come and
right.
eat. He got
Yeah,
his
so
holidays confused.
Go look for a poor guy, and when you find a poor guy, bring him in and give him some of the food.
Right.
Okay.
But he came again and said, "Father, one of our nation is struggling and is cast out in the marketplace." And he came again. I don't understand.
So
No, one of our nation is strangled. He's
Strangled.
dead. He found
Oh.
a dead person.
Right, so he sent his son out to find some meat. His son went out and came back and said, "Oh no, Dad, look, guess what happened when I was out in the alley. I saw a dead man. There was a Jew who was killed."
Okay. Then before I had tasted of any meat, I started up and took him up into a room until the going down of the sun.
Okay,
Did
keep
they
going.
take the dead person?
Yeah.
Pardon? Yeah,
They took the
So
dead
he
person.
wasn't a Kohen.
right, not a Kohen.
Then I returned and washed myself and ate my meat in heaviness. Remember that the prophecy of Amos, and he said, "Your feast shall be turned into mourning, and all your mirth into lamentation." So they're saying you're supposed to have a feast after a burial? Is that
Well,
what
no,
it is?
what he's saying is that he came back and he was supposed to have a feast, and he was really happy because he finally came back and it was Shavuos. His wife made him all this food, and now he's come back, and what was supposed to be a happy time is now turned into a sad time.
Right.
Just like Amos, the prophet, said, "I will turn your feasts into lamentations."
Therefore I wept after the going down of the sun. I went and made a grave and buried him. But my neighbors mocked me and said, "This man is not yet afraid to be put to death for his matter, who fled away, and yet, lo, he buries the dead again."
Okay, so what happened? He ran away the first time because he was burying people. Now he comes back and he's burying people again. And what do the neighbors say? This guy is crazy.
Right.
Right? This guy's crazy because he's burying people again. He's just going to get into trouble.
The same night as I returned from the burial, I slept by the wall of my courtyard, being
Polluted.
but on my face was uncovered.
Okay, so what happened was that he was tamei, right? Because he buried
Right.
this person. So he didn't go into the house because he was tamei, and he lay down, and that's when the bird came, which I left out.
And my wife Hannah did take women's work to do.
Okay, so this is an important piece here, at least for our perspective here. It says, "And my wife Anna did take women's works to do." So up until now, we haven't heard a lot about women, but what this is suggesting is that women didn't just do household domestic work, but they took odd jobs. So women would do odd jobs to bring in income for the family. So let's hear a little bit more about this.
And when she had sent home to the owners, they paid her wages and gave her also besides a kid.
Okay, not like a child. They didn't give her a child, they gave her a little goat. So she did sewing, or she made cholent for somebody, or she did something. And then she would take it to the people, and then what would they do? They would pay her for it. And then not only did they pay her for it, but they also gave her a goat.
They tipped her with a goat.
Right, it's like the stories about doctors and whoever being paid for by
Right.
sheep and goats. Okay.
And when it was in my house and began to cry, I said to her, "From whence is this kid? Is it not stolen? Render it to the owner, for it is not lawful to eat anything that is stolen." So,
Okay, so what does he think? He thinks his wife has.
Stolen it.
Yeah, so here's an interaction between husband and wife. We have honest Tobit. His wife has brought home a goat. He says, you must have stolen the goat. Take it back to his owners. Okay.
But she replied unto me, it was given for a gift more than the wages. Whence I did not believe her, but bid her rendering it to the end. I was abashed at her, but she replied to me, where are thine alms and thy righteous deeds? Behold, thou and all thy works are known.
Okay, so what is he saying? What's she saying?
The people know that you're an honest person and that you're righteous, and people are giving me because of that.
Yeah, and another little piece of it is that he didn't believe her. She said she got it as a gift, and she said, you're supposed to be a righteous person. Why don't you
Right,
Why don't you believe me? Why don't you believe me? This is a woman with a little bit of chutzpah. It's a woman who's willing to stand up to her husband and tell her what she thinks.
Well, didn't he leave her and run away? And so she obviously was supporting her and her kid without
Good.
him. So
Right.
yeah, for her to have chutzpah, it was like, look, you're finally back. Now you don't believe how I'm dealing with stuff.
That's right. Good. Yeah. So she was caring for herself and her son all by herself, and now he's coming back, and then he's complaining that
Well,
she's.
you might not know how she was taking care of herself either.
Well, yeah, we don't know. Although it
Right.
does say that she was taking in piecework. She could have been doing something else, I suppose. Okay.
Then I, being grieved, did weep, and in my sorrow prayed, saying, O Lord, thou art just, and all thy works and all thy ways are mercy and truth, and thou judgest truly and justly forever. Remember me and look on me, punish me now for my sins and arrogance and the sins of my father who have sinned before thee.
Okay. So what he's saying is, I screwed up. I sinned. I didn't believe my wife. I should have believed my wife, and everything is okay. Okay. Part 3. So part 3 is an equivalent to a last will and testament. So it's kind of fascinating to see what this guy who lived 2,000 years ago is suggesting about the way that his son should live. So I told you before, he sends Tobit on this journey to find the 10 pieces of silver, but he doesn't know he's ever going to see his son again. So he's basically giving him an ethical will at this point, telling him how he should behave. So, Fran, you want to read?
And said with myself, I have wished for death, and wherefore I do not call my son Tobias, that I may signify to him of the money before I die. And when he called him, he said, My son, when I am dead, bury me, and despise not thy mother, but honor her all the days of thy life, and do not do that which shall please her, and grieve her not.
All right, so first thing you have to do is be nice to your
Mother.
Yeah.
be nice to your mother. Don't give your mother any tsuris. Make her happy. Okay.
Remember, my son, that she saw many dangers for thee, and when thou wast in her womb, and when she is dead, bury her by me in one grave.
Okay. So number 2.
Now go back. Bury me in one grave.
So bury us together.
Yeah. Bury us
But
together.
not side by side, but one on top of the other.
So, I mean, it's a good question. I have to look into a little bit. But during this time, they tended not to bury people in the ground. Have you been to Israel before?
No.
Okay, so in Israel, it's very rocky. There's not a lot of good soil. And so what they would do is they would often bury people in crypts. So they would take the bodies and they would put the bodies into like a holding place until the flesh had worn off, and then they'd have the bones. And then they would take the bones and put the bones into an ossuary, and then they would put them into crypts. So it may very well be when they're talking about one grave here, they're not talking about a grave in the ground, they're talking about putting the bones into the same
Well,
crypt.
we're talking about with Abraham and so forth, Hebron.
Right,
Because there was caves.
right. So yeah, so they didn't bury them in the ground, so we put them into little niches in the caves. So either it was side by side or it was together. All right, so let's find out what happens next.
My son, be mindful of the Lord our God all thy days, and let not thy be set to sin or transgress his commandments. Do uprightly thy life long, and follow not the ways of unrighteousness.
Okay, so do what God tells you to do.
For if thou deal truly, thy doings shall prosperously succeed to thee, and to all them that live justly. Give alms for thy substance, and when thou givest alms, let not thine eyes be envious, neither turn thy face from any poor, and the face of God shall not be turned away from thee.
Okay, so what should you do?
So
Be nice.
Give to the poor.
give to the poor.
Right.
And then, if thou hast abundance, give alms accordingly. If thou have but little, be not afraid to give according to that little. For thou layest up a good treasure for thyself against the day of necessity.
Okay, so if you have a lot of money, give a lot of money. If you have a little bit of money, a little bit of money. But what's not verse 9 say?
Says, save some money.
Set up a savings account, right? Or set up a retirement account.
Right.
I was in the radio the other day, it said that 4 of 10 people who are approaching retirement age don't have any money put away for retirement. So Tobit is telling us 2,000 years ago.
Right.
Okay.
Get that orange money, which
Yeah.
I'm not really sure why it's called orange money.
Put money away.
Right,
Okay.
orange money. Because that alms do deliver from death, and suffereth not come into darkness.
Okay, so it's better not to get alms. It's better to put your money away.
For alms is a good gift unto all that give it in the sight of the Most High,
Okay, so it's good to give, but it's
Right.
better to have.
to have your own. Beware of all whoredom, my son, and chiefly take a wife of the seed of thy fathers, and take not a strange woman to wife, which is not of thy father's tribe, for we are the children of the prophets.
Oh, Noah.
Oh, that's supposed to be, I wondered what that was. Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember, my son, that our fathers from the beginning, even that they all married wives of their own kindred, and were blessed in their children, and their seed shall inherit the land.
Okay, so what are you supposed to do? Marry a
Marry a
good
Jew.
Jewish
Girl,
girl. Okay.
preferably a cousin.
So when you go out there, make sure that you marry a good Jewish girl. Don't take anybody else. Stay within the tribe.
Right.
Okay.
And watch out for those sexy girls. Now therefore, my son, love thy brethren, and despise not in thy heart thy brethren, the sons and daughters of thy people, in not taking a wife of them. For in pride is destruction and much trouble, and in lewdness is decay and great want. For lewdness is the mother of famine.
Okay. So what's he telling him to do?
Again, take a
From your own tribe.
take a wife of who's Jewish, or one of the tribe.
So let's look at it again. Now, therefore, my son, love thy brethren. So love your Jews.
Love your brother.
Yeah, love your Jews.
brother.
I think he's telling him, I may be reading too much into this, but I think he's telling him here, don't be a self-hating Jew. Okay? Don't turn
Right.
away from your people. And despise not thy heart, despise not in thy heart thy brethren and the sons of daughters of thy people. So even then, 2,000 years ago, what were young Jews doing? The grass was greener on the outside. Okay, they were looking and say, I don't want to be this Jewish thing anymore. I want to do something else. And what he's saying is, love your brethren, stay with your people. There's a lot of good in your people. Okay, let's find out. Next.
Let not the wages of any man who hath wrought for thee tarry with thee, but give him it out of hand. For if those serve God, he will also repay thee. Be circumspect, my son, in all things thou doest, and be wise in all thy conversation.
So if you have a worker, what are you supposed to do? Pay him. Pay him right away.
And, and it also says to be careful of everything that you do and what you're saying, too.
Mm-hmm.
Do that to no man which thou hatest. Drink not wine to make thee drunken, neither let drunkenness go with thee on thy journey.
Okay, so don't drink too much.
Yeah. Give of thy bread to the hungry, and of thy garments to them that are naked. According to thine abundance give alms, and let not thine eyes be envious when thou givest alms. So give to the poor, and
Graciously.
don't. Once you give it, don't say, I wish I didn't do that. So, yeah.
Okay, so we're running out of time.
All of
So
this is it's kind of repeating all the things in the, in the commandments and
Right.
what you're supposed to be doing.
Okay, so let me read you the part about Tobias and Sarah getting married. Part 4.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay. Then he called his daughter Sarah, and she came to her father. And he took her by the hand and gave her to be wife to Tobias, saying, Behold, take her after the law of Moses, and lead her away to thy father. And he blessed them. So, good Jewish marriage. Harayat Mekudeshet li, so, you're Moses, and the father blessed them, but in the back of his head, what's he thinking?
This guy's gonna die.
This guy's gonna die. And he called Edna his wife, and he took paper, and he'd write an instrument of covenants, and sealed it. So what did he do? He wrote a ketubah, right?
Ketubah.
So he wrote a ketubah, although it's interesting that in this case, the father-in-law is writing the ketubah. It's not the father-in-law who's supposed to write the ketubah today. And then what do? After you get married and you have the ketubah and you read the ketubah, what do? You have dinner.
They had a feast.
Then they began to eat. After Raguel called his wife Edna and said unto her, Sister, prepare another chamber and bring it thither. And when she had done as she had bidden her, she brought her thither, and she wept, and she received the tears of her daughter, and said unto her, Be of good comfort, my daughter. The Lord of heaven and earth give thee joy for thy sorrow. Be of good comfort, my daughter. So she's worried that her husband is going to die, and the mother-in-law is trying to make her feel better.
And they already prepared a chamber for him.
Right, yeah. And when they had supped, they brought Tobias in unto her. So after dinner, they brought the poor bridegroom in. And as he went, he remembered the words of Raphael, and he took the ashes of the perfumes, and he put the heart of the liver of the fish thereupon, and made a smoke therewith. The which smell, when the evil spirit had smelled, he fled to the utmost parts of Egypt, and the angel bound him. So Asmodeus ran away, and the angel tied him up. And after that, they were both shut in together. So shutting in together is, what's that in our wedding ceremonies today? Yichud, right?
Yeah.
So that's the yichud. So they have to be together. So after that, they were shut together. Tobias rose out of bed and said, Sister, arise, and let us praise that God will have pity on us. Then began Tobias to say, Blessed are you, O Lord, God of our fathers, and blessed is thy holy and glorious name forever. Let the heavens bless thee and all thy creatures. You made Adam and gave Eve his wife as a helper and stay, and them of mankind you have said, It is not good that man should be alone. Let us make him as an aid like unto himself. So he's praying to God and say, God, you told us to be married. That's what the Torah says. You're supposed to be together. And now, O Lord, I take not this my sister for lust, but uprightly. Therefore mercifully ordain that we may become aged together. So please, I don't want to die. And I love her. I guess he's not saying he loves her, but he's saying that I'm doing the right thing, and I'm marrying her, and I'm not lustful. And she said with him, Amen. So we're saying that the term Amen is already settled here. And they slept both that night. And Raguel, who's Raguel? Her dad arose and went and made a grave, saying, I fear lest he should also be dead. But when Raguel had come into his house, he said unto his wife Edna, Send one of the maids, and let's see whether he is alive. If he be not, then we may bury him, and no man know it. So first thing in the morning, they went to the wedding chamber, and they went to see whether or not Tobias was alive, because they wanted to bury him before it got too light, so people wouldn't know what was going on. The story is really big on burying people.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but we don't know if he buried all the other ones in secret.
Right, we don't know that.
Right. Or at least the ones after the first one.
So-
Still a virgin, supposedly.
Well, no, they actually slept together, this one.
Well, it says they
This
slept
one did,
together.
but previously.
Right. It previously sounded like they died before they ever got to
That's right, yeah.
that part. Yeah.
So the maid opened the door and went in and found them both asleep, and came forth and told them that he was alive. And he kept the wedding feast 14 days. This was one very happy father that finally got rid of his daughter, and he got married. And he said to his daughter, Honor thy father and mother. And oh, I'm sorry. So now she's leaving. So he said to his daughter, Honor thy father and thy mother-in-law, which are now thy parents. So they're heading back
Right.
to
Because he's a son and
Right.
the sons stay with
right.
the
Yeah. So
family.
he's saying, be good to your mother-in-law. Okay. that I may hear good report of you, because if they call and they tell me, I want to know. And he kissed her. And Edna also said to Tobias, the Lord of heaven restore thee, my dear brother, and grant that I might see thy children of my daughter Sarah before I die. So what does he want to see? He wants to see the grandchildren. He wants to see the Iowa. That I may rejoice before the Lord. Behold, I commit my daughter unto thee of special trust, do not entreat her evil. Then Tobit went out to meet his daughter-in-law at the gate of Nineveh, rejoicing and praising God, and they which saw go marveled because he had received his sight. So he's got his vision back again. I'm leaving pieces out here, but he got his vision back again. He's able to see his daughter-in-law. Tobias gave thanks before them because God had mercy on him. And when he came near to Sarah, his daughter-in-law, he blessed her, saying, You are welcome, daughter, God be blessed, which has brought you unto me. And blessed be your father and your mother. And there was joy among all the brethren which were at Nineveh. And then they lived happily ever. Oh, and they had another 7 days of wedding feast.
Wow.
So it's a cute story. And it shows some of these relationships between husbands and wives and between lovers and what one would expect of a son. So Tobit, this righteous man, was saying, be good to your mother, take care of your mother, bury me, but also be good to your fellow Jews.
So who was supposed to have written the ketubah? The husband and wife, or the bride and groom?
Yeah. Actually, the groom writes the ketubah for the bride. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Right, and he gives it to her.
All right. Next week.